Hello, my name's Paul Niederer and I'm here to talk about the 7 entities involved in a CCIV, which is a corporate collective investment vehicle, which is Australia's new investment vehicle. Now, if we follow the numbers around, the first entity is ASIC. Then we've got, of course, the Australian Financial Services Licence Holder, the CCIV itself, which is a legal entity. And then we've got each of the sub-funds, which can have, although not a legal entity, they do have their own ABN number. Then we've got the actual business that is using the funds invested, a compliance plan auditor, and then we've got somebody that creates the legals. So let's look through this. Now, ASIC, of course, we know, and the AFSL holder is the licensed entity. But then we can go to the CCIV. Now, the CCIV is a new type of company limited by shares. And the CCIV is a single legal entity, but it must have at least one sub-fund. Now, in contrast to other types of companies, a CCIV is an umbrella vehicle that is comprised of one or more sub-funds. Now, each sub-fund is comparable to an individual unit trust, which is commonly used under the existing MIS regime. Now, a CCIV must have a corporate director, which, like a responsible entity, must be a public company and must have an appropriate Australian financial services licenses. Retail CCIVs must also have a compliance plan, which meets the legislative requirements. As with the MIS regime, there are only basic prescribed requirements and a compliance plan auditor. Now, the CCIV can only issue a share or a debenture which is referable to a specific sub-fund. That means that the rights attached to the security must relate to the assets of that specific sub-fund. A CCIV may issue multiple classes of securities for each sub-fund, and a CCIV may have unlimited share capital. That means it's open-ended, or it may have fixed or limited share capital, could be closed-ended. The types of shares that a CCIV may issue are the same as other companies: ordinary shares, preference shares, and redeemable shares. Now, if we look at the sub-fund, a sub-fund of a CCIV is all or part of the business of the CCIV. Like, it might have one sub-fund or multiple ones, and that sub-fund is registered as a fund with ASIC. Now, the first sub-fund is registered as part of the broader registration of the CCIV itself, and subsequent sub-funds may be created by the CCIV by lodging an application to register the sub-fund with ASIC. Now, sub-funds will not have separate legal personalities, but each sub-fund's assets and liabilities will be segregated from the assets and liabilities of other sub-funds. The assets of each sub-fund can only be applied for specific purposes of that sub-fund, like meeting liabilities for that particular sub-fund. And this feature is going to be of particular interest to fund managers who currently create multiple classes of units and unit trusts to obtain a similar effect, but with the risk of cross-class liability. Further, for sub-funds, generally speaking, the money or the property acquired by a sub-fund by CCIV forms part of the assets of the sub-fund if the money or the property was acquired using the assets of that sub-fund. They pay the money, they buy the assets that are in that sub-fund. This protects investors in specific sub-funds of a CCIV by quarantining the business of that sub-fund from the businesses of all the other sub-funds of the CCIV. A key feature of the CCIV is the structure is that such cross-class liability risk is removed, as the assets of each sub-fund can legally only be applied for the purposes relating to that specific sub-fund. Where the money or property being acquired relates to the business of more than one sub-fund, the corporate director must determine the portion of money or property which is to be allocated across the relevant sub-funds. So we also have the business, which we discussed, the people that create the documents, the legal creators, which might be the CCIV's corporate director, it might be the AFSL, it might be the lawyers, and then of course we've got the compliance plan auditor. So those are the 7 entities involved in a CCIV. Thank you.